All right, I think everything is working. Hello. This is my live stream on let me double check everything. Looks like it's all good. How democracy prevents, I'm waiting for Facebook. That's the one concern I'm looking at here. Sorry. It's the one I really wanted to work. Oh, okay. So I wanted to do a live stream on how democracy prevents freedom. And this stems from originally wanting to do a stream on how to enslave an entire species. And that one was going to be like in a child storybook form. That. And the goal, of course, would be to notice what we are doing in our society, so how we can be a little more free from government and capitalism. That was the goal. And then when I started to do that stream, it looked like, or the storybook of that stream, it looked like it got a little too busy, and I kept getting stuck on democracy and government. And I felt like that maybe I needed to do a stream on that one just on its own. Here we go. The title was originally going to be How Democracy Actually Serves the Elite, but I changed it to be Democracy Prevents Freedom. At the end of the day, one is just one more of a step forward. Okay, so democracy, and I don't want people to think that I think this is like the American Constitution was bad or a form of government was bad. It's just that it's not good enough. And where we came from, it's certainly a step up. Like we had monarchies and dictatorships and all that. And people were generally of the mindset that you were in one of these categories. You were a peasant, you were in the middle group, this orange group, or you were closer to the top, the lords and loyalty, or you were the lord or loyalty. And this held true as long as the relationship between the two groups that you were next to was working enough for you. And it was working enough for people, but eventually people get a little more power and they get a little smarter, and they're like, I want more. I want more, not necessarily out of the king, but at least out of the government. They want this pyramid not to be so one-sided. And as a step forward to that, and as a gift, not a gift, it's a step forward from the elite. They said, you know what, these people want more control over their government, and we have to give them something. So we're going to give them this thing called democracy. And this isn't specific about American democracy, but in general, the concept of petitioning and controlling a larger power over you, and then using democracy as a means to do that. And this doesn't have to be any specific club or politics or anything. It's democracy in general. Now, in San Diego, and I suspect a lot of cities have the same problem, there is a problem with the police beating up citizens when they're arresting. This was one of the events that I went to. We have a chokehold problem. And what was going on is we have a community review board. And that was set in place by our government, the mayor. And they said, well, we need a way to somehow have the public oversee the police. And if the police are doing stuff that's a little out of line, like they're choking us, then we need a way to say, no, that's no good. So they created this community review board. And the community review board is run by a standard set of democratic rules. What goes on is that the public says, we don't want you to do this chokehold. And then you wait 2 weeks and the police come back and they say, well, here's all the data. This is why we need the chokehold. And it takes a long time. Like the public stands up and they bloviate for a little bit. And then the next 2 weeks later, they come back and the police stands up and they bloviate a little bit. And there's never really any desire on the police department side to really get to the core of the problem. Like if they wanted to know whether or not this chokehold was working or was okay with the public, they would just have some members of the public that were on this review board do a ride along or work with them and say, you know what, we want the police to be safe, but we also want the community to be helped. So we could get your interaction that way. But that's not what goes on in police departments. So in San Diego, we have this community review board, and then they start playing games. Like when you have a democratic institution, you can start playing games because the structure is that there's the leader of the club, and they set the agenda. And this right here is a lot of power. I don't know if you've ever been to a meeting. I can't stand meetings because usually there's like one or two things you want to talk about. And here, when the agenda is set and the meeting's an hour long, it seems like 45 minutes of it is just crap you don't want to hear. And if you are in charge of that meeting and you don't want some item to get too much attention, you can schedule it that way. And when you facilitate the discussion, then you can make it such that ideas never really have to be addressed. The person can stand up and say something, yeah, we don't want to be choked, but that doesn't really do any good if you can just move on. And if you vote based on how many people show up, then it no longer becomes about whether or not the idea is right or sound. It's just about how many people you have. And you can see here that the community is begging for people to show up in support of them. And this has nothing to do about whether or not the chokehold is valid, that the police need it or not. And they call this democracy. It's almost synonymous with freedom. Like it gives people power. Like I just searched for democracy and that GIF came up. But what goes on is the police force can stall, or if the person setting the agenda of the meeting or running the meeting wants to remove people from the review boards, they don't have a quorum and they can't vote. There are tons of different tactics people can use to prevent the new ideas from getting forward. That's the structure of democracy. And I know that there's a lot more details and meeting minutes and all that stuff, but all of it's done because the institution on the other side of democracy is looking for a way that you don't have to address the problem. I see Michelle mentioned you don't see a problem in Europe. I would actually argue that you do. The type of freedom that I'm advocating, or maybe you're talking about the police, that's probably different. There are a lot of things that depend on the community for sure, but I think there is a structural problem with democracy. So here's some of the shortcomings. It ignores the incentive for corruption. I'm going to go ahead and just throw that guy up there now. And if you are the person leading the meeting, you have generally arrived there because enough of the people obviously want you there, but you've generated enough interest and enough power and support to get in that position. And once people acquire power, they tend to be incentivized to stick around and do what they can to stay in power. And that fundamentally discourages cooperation. Because if a new idea challenges you or challenges your power, that may be good for the institution but bad for you. And this system doesn't take into account that incentive for corruption. Trump just tweeted, 106-year-old, all right, great. It's also, this one is an article I wrote. Scott Peters is the luckiest man on the planet. For those of you who don't know, I ran for Congress, and you have to turn in a number of signatures, and I was 2 signatures short, even though I turned in an additional amount, but they said the signatures that I gained from the people on the street didn't match the voter record file. Now, this could be completely valid, or it could just be a little incentive for corruption. And if the system wanted new ideas, then they would have turned around and said, well, you're 2 signatures short. Now you have a week to get 2 signatures, because one could easily get 2 signatures. And if you have an idea, like maybe you don't want to get choked. Let me see, go back to this one. Like you don't want to get choked. And there's only one political party, choked by the police. There's only one political party supporting that policy. Then you're kind of forced to adopt every other policy that party has, even if it's not something that you want. And since you are voting on someone else implementing it. Just by that rule there, it implies authority, and you have to have then enforcement. And that's the opposite of freedom. It requires one solution to be there, instead of kind of assuming that, hey, maybe there are multiple paths we can take. Imagine if democracy was used as a way to solve problems in maybe like a tech company like Apple Computer. Like if they use democracy to solve whether or not they're going to name or release something this or something. It's like it's not efficient, and it doesn't actually encourage getting into the problem. It's basically an acknowledgement that you can't resolve the problem, and then you're just going to sit there, cross your arms, and then vote. It doesn't work. It dilutes discussion, of course, if there's not an incentive to solve the problem. In fact, if you are leading the meeting, there's probably an incentive not to solve the problem. There's probably an incentive not to have good discussion. I've been a part of a few groups, not even political, but a few Democratic groups where that was the case. And you are forced to compromise if you want to have something that's done, that's a priority. So if gun rights are a priority, or building a wall is a priority, and taxing the rich in our society, you don't really have that option. And when you play out these shortcomings, you have people using this system of democracy to, like in San Diego's case, to try and limit what the police can do. Obviously not working too well. If the police wanted our opinion, they could just ask for it and work with us, but they don't. They use democracy. And that same plays out with control over the city governments and state governments and local governments. And you do over time, and I'm aware that's a Call of Duty sign, but if you don't have any influence over these people, and these people don't have influence over the larger society, don't be surprised when you have a society that has a lot of war and poverty, and that the very corruption that has been incentivized by that system is effectively made legal. You could blame Citizens United, but honestly, money had been in politics long before Citizens United. And this is expected. This outcome, war, poverty, corruption, that's expected when you are administering any large institution with democracy. Now to the thing that I was going to originally call this, how democracy serves the elite. If you have a large group of people that generally view their life as, you can go for private sector or the public sector, and if you want to serve and solve large-scale problems for the good of people, not through profit, that you go through the public sector. And that if other people are doing that, the way you address that is through voting and democracy, because voting and democracy leads to freedom. If people spend their whole lives doing that, then it really serves the people who don't need to operate under that capacity. It serves people who can't go to jail because they can buy their way out of it. It serves people who don't have to worry about seeking profit in order to get their basic needs met. They basically have enough money and wealth that they can do whatever they want. And if you live in a world where if you want to make a change, go run for office, or go vote, or democracy is freedom, spreading freedom around the world, we spread democracy, then that's a sort of mental slavery. And that's why I like this quote so much. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they're free. If you believe that your freedom can be achieved through democracy and voting, and that there are those operating above that level, knowing that democracy is going to hold you back, just like in this community policing. They knew that they could use democracy to prevent the community from addressing the issues of getting choked. They could just keep dragging it on, and then the community can vote on it, and then they can change the name of the choke to something else. You can use democracy as a way to prevent addressing the issue. And I'm not saying democracy is bad. Again, it's a step forward. But we should know what the limitations are. And if you follow the chain out, obviously that would kind of mean that our whole system is a little bit pointless, because if we don't really have democracy and we don't have control of our government, why vote? And I think that's a valid question. A lot of people do not vote, and I don't blame them for it. But I think it's worth voting, even if you're going to fill out the ballot empty, but also understand the likelihood of that having any changes. And if it's not going to have any long-term effects, if it's not going to meet your needs, then you should consider doing something else, pursuing another alternative. And the one I've been suggesting, most people know, is the cooperative economy. You can call it whatever you want. I think that getting the greed that is driving all of this out of our economic model, the greed that means that we have to have intellectual property, courts to protect that intellectual property, there's like a whole special court, a whole special government branch, the copyright court and all that stuff. There's advertising, there's lawyers, all this stuff that is a manifestation of the greed of capitalism, where we're trying to get more wealth for ourselves instead of trying to make our communities better. So that was my suggestion for an alternative to democracy. But I think what's really important is that people need to see what the limitations are of our system and see that democracy isn't necessarily used in the best capacity. It's not like it's always going to lead to our freedom. And once you accept that, and once you also accept that maybe capitalism has corrupted some of these processes because of the greed, then that gives you a little bit more of a freedom to say, you know what, maybe I need to do something different than just voting. Maybe voting third party isn't going to be enough either, because I can see a lot of other people aren't voting third party, or a lot of people just don't vote. However, whatever process it takes for you. But it's good to be realistic about the situation that we're in. And that is how I believe democracy serves the elite. The people who stay out of jail can basically buy their way and push this concept of democracy and freedom down our throats. And as long as we believe it, then they will continue to be successful. I think that's good. I don't have any questions I need. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you guys on the internet.